In the quiet space where night drifts like spilled ink across the sky, there lies a peculiar corridor of history, one rarely visited by scholars and almost never spoken aloud by storytellers because it is lined not with triumphs, conquests, or grand coronations, but with soft, dusty tales of royal missteps. They are stories not of glory, but of gentle human folly moments when kings and queens, wrapped in silk and ceremony, met ends so strangely awkward that the universe itself seemed to blush. Yet even in their embarrassment, there is something tender, almost comforting, about these stories, for they remind us that even those who wore crowns were still as human as the rest of us, stumbling through existence, uncertain, hopeful, and sometimes hilariously unlucky. Tonight, as you settle into stillness, let the lanterns of long-forgotten palaces flicker open one by one. Let the corridors lengthen, the echoes soften, the carpets stretch endlessly beneath your feet, until you find yourself wandering through time. Each step is slow, warm, and weightless, as though sleep itself is lifting the hem of your thoughts. And in this drifting palace of memory, the kings and queens appear not as grand figures, but as gentle silhouettes, amused by their own clumsiness, waving you closer to hear the quieter versions of their stories, softened by centuries polished into lullabies. Begin with the tale of King Edmund, the absent-minded, a monarch whose castle was perched high on a hill where the air always seemed slightly confused, as though it couldn't decide whether to blow in from the sea or drift down from the mountains. The king was known for wandering off mid-conversation, mid-ceremony, mid-sentence, and sometimes mid-meal. He would begin discussing foreign trade agreements and somehow end up investigating why the palace geese were honking at the moon. His advisors followed him constantly, scribbling notes in frantic attempts to convert his drifting thoughts into functional governance. One summer afternoon, Edmund decided to host a royal picnic on the palace lawns. The event was meant to impress visiting nobles, but the king became utterly transfixed by a particularly fluffy dandelion. Believing it to be a rare magical herb described in an old herbal manuscript, he bent closer still, then closer again, until he inhaled at precisely the wrong moment and managed to breathe in the entire seed, cloud sending him into such an extravagant fit of sneezing that he stumbled backwards into a decorative fountain. It was said that his final words were a very confused, very disappointed whisper about how magic plants should come with warnings. And although palace scribes tried for years to reshape the narrative into something more dignified, a noble investigation of natural science, a meditative moment of botanical appreciation, people preferred the gentler, simpler version, that their king had drifted into eternity the same way he had lived, curious, distracted, and enchanted by something small and fluffy. The lanterns around the tale flicker, and the hallway stretches softly into the next memory, leading you deeper into the velvety quiet of the past. Here you find Queen Melisande the Delicate, beloved for her kindness, feared for her frailty, a woman so sheltered by her court that a stray breeze was seen as a diplomatic threat. Her palace was filled with silk curtains that barely moved, servants who walked on padded shoes, and musicians instructed never to play too loudly in case her heart leapt in surprise. But Melisande, despite her fragile reputation, loved one thing fiercely: pastries. Cream-filled, honey-drenched, fruit-stuffed pastries that she requested every morning. One gentle spring day, the royal pastry chef invented an experimental confection, an impossibly light puff, dusted with powdered sugar so fine it drifted like frost in warm sunlight. When the queen leaned in to take her first blissful bite, she exhaled with excitement, sending a shimmering cloud of sugar up into the air. Palace witnesses swore the sugar sparkled like fairy dust, as it hovered, hesitated, then settled directly into her nose, causing a sneeze so delicate, so dainty that the court chroniclers described it as sounding like a polite mouse clearing its throat. But the queen, overwhelmed by the suddenness of it, fainted elegantly onto a chaise and drifted peacefully into eternity, rumored to have muttered a final, blissful remark about the importance of quality desserts. Her legacy became a sweet whisper passed between bakers for centuries. Honor the pastry, for it once sent a queen gently into eternal slumber. Past her story, the corridor grows wider, its carpets deeper, softer, as though encouraging your steps to slow, your mind to loosen, your breathing to settle. Another lantern glows to life. This one reveals the tale of King Theobald the unreasonably proud, a ruler whose ego was so immense that even the palace mirrors complained. He adored tournaments, jousting, archery, wrestling, anything that involved an audience cheering his name. Unfortunately, Theobert had none of the skills typically required for these activities. He once attempted to lift a ceremonial sword and accidentally threw it through a stained glass window. The fragments spelled out an unfortunate resemblance to the shape of his crown, which people considered an omen, though no one dared say so aloud. The king's final misadventure occurred during his annual demonstration of supreme majesty, an event he invented and insisted upon personally leading. Each year, he attempted something new, leaping over a tiny decorative stream, naming constellations incorrectly with great confidence, or lifting a helmet he thought was heavier than it was. On the fateful day, he attempted to ride his grand warhorse, while wearing a cape embroidered with so many gold sequins that the court tailor later confessed the garment weighed as much as a small pantry. As the king mounted the horse, the cape caught on a saddle hook, yanked him sideways, and dragged him into a slow, inevitable tumble that ended with Theobert sprawled on the grass in a glittering heap. The crowd gasped, certain this was part of the performance, until he proclaimed loudly, proudly, and incorrectly that he had intended the fall as a demonstration of ground dominance. Moments later, overwhelmed by embarrassment, heat, and the weight of his excessively sequined attire, he drifted away from the world, leaving behind a kingdom that agreed quietly, respectfully, and unanimously, never to wear sequins again. The palace corridor hums with soft echoes now, each story making the air warmer, heavier, easier to sink into. Your thoughts grow looser, stretching out like tired travelers in a quiet inn. Another lantern lights gently. This one belongs to Princess Eleonora the overly enthusiastic, who adored exotic animals. Her palace became a sanctuary of creatures from every corner of the known world, peacocks that strutted through the gardens like jeweled diplomats, turtles given tiny crowns for reasons no one fully understood, parrots that sang songs in 4 languages, though none accurately. Eleonora loved them all, but none more than her beloved pet swan, Sir Feathersworth, a bird with a regal posture and a personality that palace staff quietly described as aggressively judgmental. One serene morning, Eleonora decided to teach Sir Feathersworth a new trick she had read about, the royal bow. She demonstrated, bending forward gracefully. The swan, interpreting this as a gesture of weakness or possibly an invitation to assert dominance, lowered his head and delivered a firm, indignant peck to the princess's shimmering tiara, knocking it sideways. So startled was Eleonora that she swooned directly into the palace's lavender hedge, where she remained perfectly peaceful and motionless, carried gently from life by shock, fragrance, and her own flair for dramatic responses. Sir Feathersworth reportedly strutted triumphantly away, unaware of the historical footnote he had just inspired. And so the stories continue, one after another, each as soft as a sigh, drifting through candlelit halls and moon-washed courtyards. Kings who slipped on polished marble because their servants buffed it too enthusiastically. Queens who insisted on wearing impossibly heavy crowns despite repeated medical advice. Princes who held contests to determine who could sit the stillest during meetings, and then accidentally fell asleep for the final time. Dukes who attempted to impress visiting dignitaries by balancing ornamental fruit on their heads, and discovered the limits of their own coordination. Monarchs whose final moments were strange, gentle reminders that even the most powerful people in history lived fragile, funny, wonderfully imperfect lives. The moonlit corridor stretches deeper now, and the air carries faint whispers of places you may have heard of in waking life. Ancient courts, medieval keeps, Renaissance palaces, though here in this dream-soft retelling they appear only as gentle reflections drifting between history and imagination. The next lantern glows with a pale amber shimmer, and within it emerges the story of King Adolf Frederick of Sweden, remembered by historians for a rather unusual fondness for food. In the waking world, his passing is often recalled with awkward amusement. But here, in the quiet hush of night, the tale softens into something warmer, more tender. Imagine him in a grand dining hall where the walls gleam with polished birchwood, and frost gathers peacefully outside the window panes. The king sits cheerfully at a long table covered with bowls of berries, plates of warm pastries, and delicate glasses filled with sweet milk. He was a monarch with a hearty appetite, enthusiastic rather than indulgent, delighted by flavors the way poets are delighted by words. Servants whispered that he could taste the difference between 2 types of almonds without even looking at them, and that he could identify whether a pastry had been baked by the palace chef or by his apprentice. One winter evening, when snow fell like drifting feathers across Stockholm, the king enjoyed a grand meal meant to brighten the gloom of the long Nordic winter. He laughed heartily with his courtiers, savoring a creamy dessert scented with cardamom. That joy, that simple pleasure of warmth and sweetness, wrapped around him like a blanket. And so, drifting into contentment, he slipped quietly from this world exactly as he had lived, pleasantly full, deeply satisfied, and humming softly about the importance of dessert. History may smile at the oddness of it, but in the soft glow of this dream corridor, the moment becomes gentle, comforting, a reminder that even kings are soothed by simple comforts. The lantern dims, and another brightens, this one shimmering with the faint colors of ancient parchment. Here waits the tale of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the first unifier of China, though here we meet him not as the stern conqueror of textbooks, but as a weary traveler wandering between myths. For years he searched for something no mortal could grasp, a mythical elixir promising eternal life. He consulted mystics who read the winds, alchemists who ground strange minerals into shimmering powders, and sailors who claimed to have glimpsed islands populated by immortal beings. In the soft rendering of this sleep lantern, imagine him traveling along a quiet coastal road, the sea sighing gently against the shore. He rides beneath a sky blushed with pale morning light, holding in his hands a small vial filled with beads that glimmer like captured moonlight. He believed, with all the earnestness of a tired heart longing for rest, that these shimmering pellets held the secret to timelessness. But sometimes, as history whispers, the things we chase bring us somewhere unexpected. In this softened version of events, the emperor sits on a quiet hill overlooking the sea, swallowing the glimmering beads and waiting for the world to sharpen into immortality. Instead, the edges blur, his breath softens, and he slips gently into the realm that all humans eventually join. Perhaps, in the peaceful telling of this tale, he finally found the eternal stillness he spent his life seeking, not through alchemy, but through rest. The corridor shifts again, its shadows lengthening like the folds of a heavy tapestry. Now the lantern reveals the story of King Alexander of Greece, a young monarch whose curiosity often exceeded his caution. His tale, softened into a lullaby, begins with a warm, Mediterranean afternoon where sunbeams glimmer on marble floors and the air carries the scent of olives and wild thyme. Alexander adored animals, especially those given to him as gifts from distant lands. One day he attempted to separate his beloved pet from a quarrelsome creature, not realizing that even gentle creatures have tempers. In history, the encounter ended abruptly, awkwardly, almost comically, but here in this dreamy reverie, the moment slows, softens. Alexander steps between the animals with a smile, a hand outstretched in instinctive kindness. There is a sudden flurry of motion, then stillness. And the king, surprised and faintly amused, leans back against a marble column, sighs at his own impulsiveness, and drifts quietly into a peace he never knew he was seeking. You continue walking, feeling the corridor warm around you, as though draped in velvet. The next lantern glows with medieval hues, deep reds and candlelit golds, and within it stands George II of Great Britain, a king whose demise has long been cited with awkward chuckles. But in this softened nighttime version, the tale becomes gentle, even affectionate. Picture him in his palace at Kensington, pacing in ornate slippers, muttering about politics and pastries in equal measure. The king was a creature of habit, rising early each morning to greet the day with brisk purpose. Yet one autumn dawn, as the mist curled around the palace gardens, he felt a sudden wave of stillness. Perhaps it was the weight of years, or the quiet reminder that even monarchs cannot outrun time. He sat down, exhaled slowly, and drifted away as peacefully as fallen leaves settling on a pond. History, of course, records the moment with less elegance, but sleep stories are kinder, smoothing the edges into tranquility. As you move further, the corridor grows hazier, the lanterns farther apart, their glow merging with the gentle fuzz of oncoming dreams. Now comes a tale from the Italian Renaissance, draped in moonlit stone. This is the softened story of Pietro Aretina, sometimes called the Scourge of Princes, not a king, but a man influential enough that royalty feared his sharp tongue. One evening during a lavish dinner filled with laughter and mischief, a simple silly joke, sent him into such a fit of laughter that he leaned back in his chair and tipped over in one grand graceless tumble. And in the soft retelling, his laughter continued even as he drifted away, echoing inside the stone hall like the sound of bells, warm and oddly comforting. It is said that somewhere in the dream halls of history, Aretino still chuckles, amused that his final moment was one of joy rather than bitterness. The lantern fades. You move deeper into the corridor of gentle embarrassments. Next appears a tale from ancient Greece, gently recast into something warm and airy. This is the story of Chrysippus, a philosopher of brilliant wit. One twilight he watched a donkey nibbling on ripe figs, an image he found so unexpectedly delightful that he burst into uncontrollable laughter. And in this softened version, that laughter becomes a breeze, a rising, bubbling, irresistible joy that lifts him like a feather and carries him gently past the threshold between the waking world and whatever lies beyond. His students whispered for years that joy, when too powerful, can lift a person straight out of life. And while the tale is surely embellished, the dreamlike version makes it seem not tragic, but almost lovely, to be carried away by delight. The corridor now grows dimmer, sleepier. You feel its warmth gathering around you like blankets. And still more stories wait, softened, dreamy retellings of strange royal demises that history often recites with harshness, but which, in the quiet of this moment, transform into gentle reminders that even the mighty fall in wonderfully human ways. The corridor stretches onward, its shadows lengthening like velvet ribbons drifting through time, and you walk deeper into its soft, drowsy glow. With each step the air grows warmer, quieter, as though all of history is slowly exhaling, inviting you deeper into its gentler truths. Another lantern flickers awake, its flame trembling like a sleepy heartbeat ready to reveal yet another tale softened by centuries and retold only in whispers. This lantern glows with the aged patina of old parchment, and within it unfolds the dreamy retelling of Crown Prince Sigurd of Norway, remembered in sober histories for a rather strange end during the Viking Age, but here, wrapped in this lullaby of softened memories, the tale takes on a warm, faintly humorous tenderness. Picture Sigurd's hall on a crisp northern night, the wooden beams scented with tar and pine, the roar of the hearth echoing like distant thunder. The prince, earnest and curious by nature, was fascinated with the new and exotic innovations, contraptions, curious devices brought to Scandinavia by traders who crossed treacherous seas. One evening, a merchant presented the prince with a newly crafted horned animal stuffed, polished, and displayed with pride. It was meant to impress him, to spark conversation, to be admired from a comfortable distance. But Sigurd, known for his enthusiasm, leaned in a little too close. He examined the horns, the stitching, the way it had been propped upright. And in a moment both comical and absurd, the prince slipped, stumbling forward and causing the elaborate display to topple with him. The hall erupted in startled gasps, the fire crackled a bit louder, and in the softened version of the tale, Sigurd simply sighed, bemused by his own clumsiness, before drifting peacefully into the long northern night. His warriors later joked that curiosity may guide a man far, sometimes a little too far. The lantern dims into the wooden walls, and another lights, this one bearing the warm glow of ancient Rome. Here lies the softened tale of Valerian, the Roman emperor whose real-life fate was harsh, but who in this sleep story receives a gentler journey. Instead of captivity and humiliation, imagine Valerian sitting in a shaded courtyard far from Rome's bustling noise. The air carries a desert breeze, dry but comforting. He has wandered far spiritually, seeking the wisdom of mystics, leaving behind the marble rigidity of the imperial throne. He sits on a stone bench warmed by the sun. A cup of date wine rests in his hand. In the dreamlike retelling, he closes his eyes simply to listen to the quiet. The way wind rustles through desert grass, the distant call of unfamiliar birds. And there, in the soft, glowing hush of an ordinary moment, the emperor exhales, feeling, perhaps for the first time, complete peace. No chains, no suffering, no spectacle, only a quiet passing into stillness, softened by the desert wind. As the glow fades, the hallway begins to sway like a changing current, carrying you into a memory lit by torches and scented by drifting sandalwood. This lantern holds the tale of King Wenceslas III of Bohemia, a young ruler whose reign was short and tangled with intrigue. In stark history, his end was violent and abrupt. But in this dream corridor, everything sharp becomes soft, everything tragic dissolves into a gentle sigh. Picture him wandering through an old monastery garden, the air perfumed with herbs and warm stone. He walks beneath grapevines draped like green curtains, reflecting on the impossibly heavy crown he has worn since youth, a crown that never quite fit him. Perhaps he had hoped, secretly, for a life of quieter pursuits: music, astronomy, poetry. As the sun sets, casting amber light across the cloisters, he sits under an archway and removes his crown. The cool stone at his back and the steady hum of evening insects lull him into a peaceful quiet, and there, amid thyme blossoms and dusk, he simply slips away, finally free from burdens he never asked to carry. The lantern sighs into darkness, and another brightens with a medieval English glow, the warm flicker of hearth fire behind oak-paneled walls. This one is the softened story of King Edward II, whose life and death remain tangled in controversy. But for this sleep story, all cruelty melts away, replaced by something far more serene. Imagine Edward walking alone through a green field near Berkeley, the grass soft beneath his feet, the mist curling like ribbon around his boots. In this peaceful version, he is no prisoner, just a weary king wandering through a quiet morning. He stops by a tree, its branches bending protectively above him. The distant call of a crow echoes in the cool air. Edward closes his eyes as the breeze brushes his face, and at last free from court politics, rebellions, and betrayal, he lies down beneath the old tree and lets himself drift into the long, gentle sleep he had been denied in life. The corridor hums with silence now, the lanterns flickering like stars along a forgotten constellation. You step forward and another lantern bursts softly to life, dust motes dancing in the glow. This is the tale of King Bela, the First of Hungary, whose death, according to chroniclers, came from a collapsing throne. But in the softened retelling, the scene becomes almost whimsical, dreamlike, something that might make the king himself chuckle. Picture a grand wooden throne in a newly built hall. It was carved hastily, perhaps too hastily, by craftsmen eager to impress the king. Bela, proud and good-humored, sits upon it during a small gathering. The hall smells of resin and newly cut wood. Suddenly, the throne gives a gentle sigh, a creak. A groan then tilts, sending Bela sliding slowly, almost elegantly, onto a pile of soft rushes on the floor. His courtiers gasp, but he simply laughs, amused by the absurdity. Yet the shock is enough to take him by surprise, his breath catching softly in his chest. And in that moment, still smiling faintly at the ridiculous fall, he drifts into eternal rest. The craftsman, embarrassed, spent years thereafter crafting furniture with meticulous care in his honor. The lantern fades out, and the hallway becomes narrower, darker, quieter, as though urging you deeper into the tranquility of sleep. Then another lantern warms the air. This one carries a scent of honey and blooming lilac. It reveals the tale of Emperor Arcadius, the mild-mannered ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire, known more for his gentleness than his strength. The historical rumor says he may have been startled to death, an almost comically human end for an emperor. But here, in the softened version, the tale becomes sweet, almost poetic. Arcadius, strolling through the palace gardens at dusk, hears a loud rustling behind him. It is a peacock, his wife's favorite, fluttering from a branch with a dramatic flourish. The emperor, ever jumpy, takes a startled step backward and sits abruptly on a stone bench. His heart, fluttering like the bird's feathers, slows as he exhales, then slows again, and in the lilac-scented breeze, he slips into a peaceful, eternal sleep, surrounded by soft plumage and evening light. And still, the corridor continues. Still more lanterns call softly to you. Still more figures, gentle, human, wonderfully imperfect, wait to show that history is filled not only with grand battles and heavy crowns, but also with clumsy missteps, awkward moments, and endings that, once softened by time, become strangely comforting. The corridor breathes around you, warm and slow, as though the walls themselves are falling into the same gentle drowsiness that now gathers around your mind. Another lantern flickers awake, haloed in a sleepy gold haze. The air grows still, soft as folded linen left to warm by the hearth. You step forward, and the world seems to hush in anticipation of the next dream-soft tale. This lantern glows with an old Celtic green, the color of moss-covered stones and misty highlands. Here slips forth the softened tale of King Edmund Ironside of England, remembered in stern chronicles as a warrior king. Yet in this sleep corridor, the harsh clang of battle melts away, replaced by a tender, almost wistful portrait of a young ruler who longed, perhaps more than he ever admitted, for a few quiet moments. Imagine Edmund's final evening not as a scene of treachery, but as a gentle dusk settling over a countryside cottage. He is exhausted from endless campaigns, the weight of politics pressing down on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Seeking a rare moment of peace, he visits a humble stone retreat tucked beside a forest clearing. As he steps inside, the warmth of the hearth greets him like an old friend. And for the first time in months, the king sits down on a simple wooden stool. The fire crackles softly. The scent of pine lingers in the air. Edmund closes his eyes. And in this softened retelling, he simply drifts off, too weary to keep the world at bay anymore. His passing is quiet, unburdened, like a tired soldier finally granted rest after too many marchers. No treachery. No violence. Just peace. The lantern dims, and the corridor seems to lengthen, whispering with distant memories. Another lantern warms to life, this one shimmering with the pinkish glow of an Italian sunrise. Here rests the gentle, dreamlike version of Pope John XXI, a scholarly man whose real-life end came through a tragic accident when the ceiling of his private study collapsed. But in this lullaby corridor, the scene transforms into something serene, even poetic. Picture a monastery library perched on a cliff above the sea. The Pope sits at a desk scattered with books written in flowing Latin, diagrams of stars, and delicate sketches of herbs. He had long been fascinated by the workings of the heavens, believing that understanding the cosmos brought one closer to the divine. He pauses in his writing, listening to the soft rhythm of waves far below. The sun warms the stone walls. Dust motes dance like tiny planets around him. In this retelling, the ceiling does not crash down. Instead, the old stones groan gently, and a single beam shifts enough to startle him. He looks up in mild surprise, leans back in his chair, and with a small, weary sigh slips into a quiet, eternal rest surrounded by the books and ideas he loved beneath a sky full of stars he spent a lifetime trying to understand. That lantern's glow dissolves like morning mist. Another awakens, this one dim, bluish, trembling with the soft melancholy of old Scandinavian winters. Within it appears the softened tale of King Halfdan the Black, a Norwegian ruler known for his wisdom and his oddly unfortunate demise. The chronicles speak of a frozen lake. But here, in the sleepy retelling, the story loses its sharpness. Imagine Halfdan traveling through the snow-covered countryside in a quiet sleigh pulled by sturdy horses. The sky above is pale, the world around muffled by thick drifts of white. He is not in a hurry. He is not heading to war. He is merely visiting a nearby village to speak with farmers about spring planting. At one point, he asks his driver to stop so he can admire the frozen landscape. He steps off the sleigh and walks to a stretch of ice that sparkles like polished glass. He gazes at his faint reflection, older, kinder, calmer than the king he used to be. His breath fogs the air, drifting like a ghostly ribbon. And in that soft, wintry stillness, Halfdan simply slips into a moment of quiet contemplation so deep that it becomes his final rest. No cracking ice, no panic, just a king listening to the silent poetry of winter, letting its calmness carry him beyond this world. The lantern dims. You move deeper, your footsteps cushioned by darkness thick as velvet. A new lantern stirs, glowing amber like warm ale in a medieval tavern. This one holds the tale of Emperor Elagabalus, a figure who history often paints in chaos and eccentricity. Yet in this sleepy corridor, he becomes something gentler, like a misunderstood youth seeking joy in a world that never understood him. Imagine him not in the tempest of politics, but in a peaceful courtyard garden filled with scented roses and soft fountains. He sits beside a pool, letting petals drift across the water's surface. The sun sets in lavender and gold, casting dreamy reflections that blur the world into something unreal. The emperor leans forward, watching fish glide beneath the ripples, their movements slow and hypnotic. He murmurs something, perhaps a poem, perhaps a wish, and closes his eyes. Here, in this softened version, his end is not dramatic but tender. He simply sinks into a long, rejuvenating sleep among the flowers and fountains he adored. The corridor grows quieter now, so quiet you can almost hear your own heartbeat slowing to match the steady rhythm of these softened stories. Another lantern awakens, a deep honey-gold glow that feels like a memory of autumn. This is the tale of King Louis III of France, remembered for a notoriously clumsy demise. But in your dream corridor, clumsiness turns charming, almost childlike. Imagine Louis as a spirited young man bounding down the palace steps on a crisp autumn morning. He is too eager to greet a messenger bearing news from the northern provinces. The air smells of fallen leaves and roasted chestnuts. His boots click quickly across the stones. He misjudges one step, just one, and in a soft, harmless tumble, he lands in a pile of leaves that servants had swept aside earlier. His attendants rush forward, fussing gently, but the king waves them off with a laugh. Yet as he tries to stand, a wave of dizziness washes over him, warm and strange. He settles back into the leaves, smiling faintly, as though amused by the idea of a king taking his final rest in a bed of autumn gold. And as his eyes drift closed, the leaves rustle softly around him, whispering him into eternity. The lantern dims softly. The corridor now feels endless, timeless, drifting between worlds. The air is warm. Your mind grows heavier, softer, dreamier. The night grows heavier, softer, like an ancient library sinking into lullaby silence. And in that hush, another royal misadventure flickers awake, glowing faintly like a candle in a forgotten corridor. The Maharaja who challenged an elephant to impress his court, in a kingdom warm with monsoon breezes and the perfume of mango blossoms, there lived a Maharaja admired for his intelligence, but quietly teased for his stubborn desire to look brave at all times. He wished to be remembered as a hero of epic proportions, even though he fainted at the sight of tiny lizards, and once ran screaming from a goat he believed was possessed. One afternoon during a grand festival, the people gathered for the elephant procession, a tradition older than the palace walls themselves. Painted elephants adorned with bells and silks ambled gracefully through the courtyard, their steps steady as drums. The Maharaja, wanting desperately to impress a group of visiting nobles, declared loudly, "I shall show you my mastery over the mightiest creature of our land." Whispers rose like startled birds. Attendants exchanged worried glances. The chief advisor pinched the bridge of his nose. The Maharaja approached the largest elephant, a gentle, ancient creature who spent more time napping than causing trouble. With a sweeping gesture, the ruler raised his hand dramatically, intending to show command and fearlessness. But the elephant, sleepy from the heat, swung its trunk lazily and nudged the Maharaja with the gentlest go-away motion an elephant could manage. Unfortunately, the Maharaja was standing on the edge of a shallow decorative fountain. He toppled backward, splashed, floundered like a startled koi fish, and inhaled far too much water in his panic. By the time the attendants rushed to pull him out, he was coughing weakly, embarrassed beyond measure, and shaking like a wet towel. He insisted he was fine, but the shock, combined with his age and stubborn pride, proved too much for his heart. And so, history whispered softly that the Maharaja passed during a moment of royal demonstration. Though everyone in the palace knew it was the elephant, sleepy nudge and the fountain, unexpected presence that truly shaped his final moment. You imagine the shimmering fountain water now, not chaotic or embarrassing, but calm, smooth, reflecting moonlight like silver silk stretching into peaceful infinity. The duchess who trusted astrology more than gravity, far to the north, in a duchy brushed by icy winds and long winters, lived a woman famed for her beauty and unwavering faith in the stars. She consulted palace astrologers for everything: what to eat, when to sleep, even which corridor to walk down each day. One chilling morning, her astrologer announced, "Today the heavens demand height. You must rise above the earth if you wish to avoid misfortune." The duchess interpreted this very literally. She insisted on climbing the highest tower of her castle, an old, slender structure built centuries before, long before people considered such things as structural safety. Servants pleaded with her to wait for the ice to thaw. Advisors urged her to at least take proper boots, but she was determined. The stars had spoken. She ascended the narrow staircase, step by careful step, her silk robe brushing the walls. Outside, wind howled like a restless ghost. Frost crackled beneath her slippers. At last she reached the top of a small balcony encircled by ancient stone. She lifted her face to the sky and whispered words of gratitude to the constellations that guided her. And then, a single gust of wind swept across the tower. Just one, but it was enough. The duchess, startled, slipped on a thin sheen of frost. She grasped for the railing. Her fingers brushed it, just brushed it, and she disappeared from view. She landed softly on a snowbank far below, peaceful and serene, as if simply lying down for a winter nap. Her passing was quiet, nearly gentle, a whisper of silk against snow. In the chronicles, her end was recorded as guided by the heavens, and perhaps in some distant way, She had indeed followed the stars, just not in the direction anyone expected. The snow settles around you, now cool, soft, weightless like a calm, pale blanket drifting through your imagination, soothing every thought into stillness. The prince who mistook a royal hunt for a private stroll. There was once a young prince of a forest-covered kingdom, known for two things: his love of daydreaming and his inability to pay attention during important meetings. Hunts were a serious affair in his land, rituals passed down through generations, filled with ceremony and discipline. The prince, however, found them dreadfully dull. He preferred wandering through the woods, admiring moss, listening to birds, or imagining himself a poet destined for greatness. One morning, while the noble hunters prepared for a grand expedition, the prince wandered off on his own, humming, completely unaware that he had stepped into the very path designated for the hunt's beginning. He paused to examine a cluster of mushrooms glowing with dew. He leaned closer, entranced. He never heard the distant horns. He never noticed the approaching riders. By the time his attendants caught up, they found him resting peacefully beside a tree, his expression serene, a gentle smile softening his face. There was no struggle, no pain, just a quiet moment where daydreaming had carried him one step too far from caution. The official records softened the details greatly, naming his passing an unexpected woodland fate, but generations whispered knowingly that the prince had simply been too enchanted by the world to notice its dangers. And as that forest scene dissolves in your mind, you feel the hush of ancient trees, their shadows long and cool, wrapping around you like a cradle of deepening twilight. The night has settled fully now, thick as velvet, warm as breath against the lantern glass. You float through its quiet corridors, following the faint shimmer of memory. Somewhere beyond the reach of waking thought, another royal story tugs gently at the edge of the dark. The sultan who declared carpets were safer than horses. In a kingdom of shimmering domes and sunlit courtyards, there ruled a sultan who adored comfort above all else. His palace was filled with cushions, silks, and carpets, so soft they seemed to sigh when stepped upon. But despite his wealth, he had a terrible fear of horses. Not dangerous horses, not wild horses, just horses in general. He claimed they looked at him suspiciously, as though plotting something behind those long eyelashes. But tradition demanded that once a year, on the day of the crescent banner, the sultan must ride at the head of a grand procession. It was a deeply honored ritual, older than his family line, older than the palace itself. So the sultan devised a solution, one he believed was brilliant. "We shall build," he said, "a moving carpet." His engineers stared, his advisors stared harder, but the sultan insisted. And over the next months, the palace artisans constructed a ridiculous contraption, a platform covered entirely in plush woven carpets, placed on wheels, pulled by several servants hidden beneath draped fabric, so the sultan could maintain the illusion of floating through the city. On the day of the procession, the sun blazed brightly across the marble streets. The crowds gathered. The musicians prepared. The sultan stepped proudly onto his moving carpet, waving with exaggerated elegance. The carpets are slippery, and wheels, when placed on uneven stone roads, wobble. As the procession turned a corner, the contraption tipped slightly. The sultan, seeking to steady himself, placed a foot too close to the edge. The entire crowd gasped as he slid off the platform and rolled gently, very gently, into a bed of flower garlands arranged for the festival. He wasn't injured at all. In fact, it looked almost graceful. But the shock, the embarrassment, the heat, and the terror of losing control, even briefly, overwhelmed him. His attendants rushed to him, but the sultan lay still, peaceful, as though he had simply drifted into the deepest, softest nap he'd ever known. History politely noted that the sultan passed during the crescent parade, but everyone whispered that carpets, not horses, had finally claimed him. You can almost feel those soft carpets now, thick, comforting, endless, spreading beneath you like a warm ocean of woven clouds. The empress who trusted a lantern too much in an empire shaped by rivers and red-painted bridges. There lived an empress renowned for her grace and her habit of carrying a lantern everywhere. She believed the lantern revealed spirits, protected her from ill fortune, and illuminated hidden truths. It was no ordinary lantern. It was crafted from delicate rice paper and gold filigree, painted with birds in mid-flight. Inside, a small candle burned with a gentle, unwavering flame. The empress would not sleep without it glowing beside her. She would not walk through the palace without it lighting her path. She believed it warned her of danger, though in truth the only danger it ever caused came from the candle itself. One quiet evening, as she prepared for a ceremonial performance showcasing court dances, the Empress tightened her elaborate robe, a breathtaking masterpiece woven with silk threads so fine they shimmered like liquid moonlight. As she turned, the lantern's flame brushed the edge of her trailing sleeve. The flame caught slowly, almost politely, as though unsure if it should proceed. The Empress didn't notice at first. Her attendants were too afraid to interrupt her sacred pre-ritual silence. And by the time they rushed forward, the silk had curled into glowing embers. They extinguished the fire quickly, but the Empress, frightened, shaken by the sudden chaos, collapsed with a soft, delicate sound like fabric folding onto itself. Her passing was gentle, nearly peaceful, as though she had simply followed the lantern's light into another realm. The scribes wrote that she departed amidst sacred illumination, and the world slowly let the details fade into myth. Now the lantern glows in your imagination, soft, safe, flickering slow as the rhythm of breath, guiding you deeper into calm. The Highland King who challenged the wind. In the rugged mountains of an old Highland kingdom, there lived a king whose pride was as towering as the cliffs. He believed the wind listened to him. He believed it shaped itself around his moods. He even believed he could command it by raising his arms dramatically. His people, fond of him despite this peculiar habit, simply nodded politely whenever he proclaimed, "Behold, I shall quiet the tempest." One autumn morning, a fierce gale swept through the valley, rattling shutters and bending trees. Instead of staying inside the warmth of the great hall, the king stepped out onto a cliffside ledge overlooking the sea, the very spot where storms hit hardest. He raised his arms, declared his might, and shouted into the roaring sky, "Winds, I am your king." The wind, being wind, did not agree. It surged suddenly, a powerful burst that lifted the king's heavy cloak like a sail. His feet slipped, and before he could regain balance, he tumbled backward, not into the sea, but onto a thick patch of heather growing in a lower hollow. He landed unharmed, perfectly safe, but the shock and the humiliation of realizing he did not in fact command the elements overwhelmed him. His heart, already worn by age and pride, simply let go. The chronicles recorded it gently, noting that he met his end on the cliffside he loved, but the villagers told a softer truth. The wind had never been his servant, only his final audience. And now you can feel that highland breeze drifting around you, cool and wide and endlessly soothing, brushing your thoughts into quiet ripples.